Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I am the Admiral, and this is Zombie Train episode number 321. This week we're taking a question from Dean. Also, we are 2 weeks from a route review, so don't forget about that. If you want me to review your route, get in touch with me via our Discord, and I will absolutely review your route. Every episode that ends with a 3 is a route review. So, anyway, Dean asks, back on episode 257, I'm not sure if I asked this before, but what happened to the SLSF Mikados? That's Frisco. 1351, 4003, etc. So I tracked down, I believe there are 4 of them. It's 1351, 1352, 4003, and 4018, which most of them were in okay shape. Actually, one of the things about them that I noticed when we went up to them, or when we went to go get them, first of all, I knew about a couple of them. I did not know about 1352, which was by far in the worst shape of all of them, and that was in somewhere in Illinois, I think. And yeah, so there was one in somewhere in Tennessee, one in Arkansas, one in Illinois, and one in Alabama. They were a little bit spread out. Sometimes when you have engines of a single class, you tend to see them all clustered together a little bit, but God, my throat just is not happening today. So I apologize. Also, something I learned about 4018 is that it was a PRR engine, very briefly. Anyway, that made it was a little bit different than the others, or than the other of its class. So there were 2 different classes here. There was the 4000 series and then the 1350 series, which 1352, for a brief time, when we found out about it, for a brief time, it was, well, let's just cannibalize this and use it to fix 1351. But then, well, 1351 had most of its parts, as did the 4000s. So we didn't really have much to cannibalize anyway, and also we came back around to the fact that basically every engine was worthwhile, or most engines. Any engine that was above the waterline was probably worthwhile. So we did end up using 1352 as well. It did take a lot of work to get it back in operational condition, but yeah, it's the kind of thing where it was a consideration, and then it was like, no, we can make use of this. 4003 was also missing some parts. So 1351 and 4018 were the engines in the best shape. In fact, 4018 had a pretty recent paint job, and so it was in very good shape. I mean, not that the paint really matters, but it had, like, all the parts. It had a new paint job. It had almost everything that we needed, and even though it needed some work in the mechanical department, having all the bits together is a lot more important than you maybe might think. I don't know why you wouldn't think that, but having a whole engine makes life a lot easier than not having a whole engine. Also, we had the mistaken notion that parts from the 2 would be compatible, but it turns out this isn't the Pennsylvania, and they aren't. So we tried that, didn't really work. We had originally thought we had something going, because it was like, 4 Mikados from the same railroad, that's really good. We can build some sort of standard off of this and mass produce parts for these engines. And then it became very clear that we can't do that. And then we sort of, moved on with our lives. But that's, not too long ago I talked about how we had a couple of competing standards. Anyway, the Mikados ended up all migrating south They ended up being used. They were actually used as part of a recovery effort from the aftermath of Firefall. It was several years after the fact, but they were used for that effort because it was like, okay, we would like some engines that are fairly similar that we can pair together without too much issue that are already in the area. I'd kept them in mostly the southeast. Or I had kept them. They had been kept. I can't act like I was managing the entire zombie train on my own. Zombie Train Incorporated, I mean. But they were kept down there, and they proved to be fairly reliable, even 1352, although that could just be attributed to the fact that 1352 had a lot of brand new parts by the time it came around to it. Also, a lot of those parts were sort of like... I mean, a lot of them we took 1351, took the parts, and then duplicated them, because they're nearly identical locomotives. But for some of the parts, we didn't feel like taking them off of 1352, and we just endeavored to find something that was close. And so they ended up being this weird, like, quasi-Pensy, quasi-Frisco parts. And a lot of the things, it didn't really matter. You know, the rods being of a different style. The dynamo was screwed, so we had to replace that. I'm not sure any of the engines actually had marker lights. So we had to replace the marker lights on all the engines. But that being said, most engines don't have marker lights. A lot of park engines don't, because those things just tend to get stolen. So they just get removed. So they ended up with PRR-style fittings in a lot of cases. Although I suppose that really is just Baldwin-style fittings, which I think these engines were Baldwin, so wouldn't really be that far off. I don't know how historically accurate a lot of the changes that we made to these engines would have been, or a lot of the things that we had to put on them to fix them. At the end of the day, we really weren't trying to make a historically accurate locomotive. We were trying to make one that worked. So, yeah, that's really what it comes down to. We then had 4 fairly capable Mikados, 2 and 2. Originally, the idea that was floating around was, oh, if we need more power, we'll just pair them together. And then they weren't together at all. They were in the same area, but not together. I recall seeing double headers with them fairly regularly during a period, but it wasn't with the 2 that you would expect to be together. You know, it wasn't the 2 4000s or the 2 35s. It was one of one and one of the other, which I don't think would have helped. At some point they were together, the 2 and 2, and then they were swapped, probably just from a train that was run one way and back with one locomotive, and then had a problem and got run back with the other locomotive, and so then you had mismatched engines, and then somebody probably thought that because they were both Frisco, you could just pair them together fairly easily, but realistically, you could have put any other Mikado with them, and it wouldn't have really made a difference, because they weren't the same. So, that's that. That's, the otherwise unremarkable life of the Frisco Mikados. I don't think they took part in any other major operation. That's the thing. Despite Mikados being our bread and butter, they were very rarely the star of the show. If we needed to conduct some sort of operation to break into a city or to isolate and destroy a huge amount of zombies, that sort of thing, we typically wouldn't take engines that we would need more than one of for a particular task. Generally, we'd have a mountain or a northern, or occasionally something bigger, but not typically, running a train like that. And oftentimes, the Mikados or something lighter would be sent in to verify the integrity of the track first. But Mikados being bread and butter, engines like the Frisco Mikados would mostly serve on just general service trains. Trains that were either going from town to town or going from yard to yard, major, which were effectively small towns at that point. So this is something I didn't get to talk about too much, but a lot of the time, if you had a major rail yard, for us, it would be a huge resource. But for a lot of people, it would just be, we were the huge resource. So, since we would build up around yards, because, obvious reasons, people would also build up around yards. So you would have towns that grew out of yards that were in kind of the middle of nowhere. I think we must have, quintupled the pre-war population of Selkirk. Which was pretty nice because it was kind of out in the woods. There really isn't much around Selkirk Yard. The other thing is, the abundance of land that was often provided by rail yards would allow us to have new development, if you could even call it that, without, doing too much groundwork, literal groundwork, and clearing out trees and stuff like that. Some of these yards had pretty heavy, or pretty good sized, parking lots. We had, Selkirk is a good example because they had the transload facility, so you had these big lots for parking cars. And originally I don't think there were any cars in there when we got to Selkirk. Maybe, there were a handful, just leftovers, but it wasn't like they were they were in the middle of unloading a train, or they had just finished unloading a train. So, yeah, the cars, or the car lots and stuff like that, they would make an excellent place for setting up of, maybe not tent cities, because you can't anchor in cement, but pop-up housing, stuff that's just made of plywood, like mobile homes almost. People got by. Generally, we would take over whatever office facilities there were, which there were some in Selkirk. And also the towers themselves, the tower in Selkirk was huge, which we would use as a lookout point because it's the top of the hump, it's the tallest building in the area. We also had a lookout on top of the water tower on the hill nearby. Not that you can really see much. Because of the area around being fairly dense forest, along with a few light suburbs, they didn't do a whole lot unless there was a fairly good-sized group of zombies. I won't even call it a horde, but, several dozen approaching, and you can see them walking on the rail lines or the roads. Anything moving would have been cause for concern, unless that something was an animal, in which case it would have been the opposite. It would have been, oh, thank God, that means there's probably no zombies around. That's, if you see, a deer, it's like, oh, thank God. Alright, let's take a load off. Of course, a lot of people would immediately think, kill the deer! But the deer does a pretty good job of being an early warning system, because when it runs off, there's something coming. And we couldn't really get, a deer farm going, because it's not easy to corral deer. We did, on occasion, find farm animals, cows, pigs, whatever. Pigs go wild real fast. Cows kind of don't know what to do with themselves for a bit. But getting a pig farm up and running was something that a lot of people would try to do. Cow farm as well. Cows need a lot more grazing space, so that was a little bit more difficult. They also are a little bit pickier about what they eat. But, anyway. Again, chickens as well. When your community's fairly small, being able to provide meat for them is not the most difficult thing. It still took a lot of effort, though. Anyway, I've still got another 30 seconds or so, but I can, talking about we went from Mikados to pig farming in a single episode, so it was kind of fun to come back to the engine reviews for a second, but I like the larger overarching questions. It really sometimes is tough for me to nail down just what a single engine did, because we had a lot of them. We had, quite a few. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Signing off.